the luxury stratification that the monetary system creates. For in this system, there is a never-ending progression of products available as one's purchasing power increases. And then there's government crime. Government crime is one of the more complex and difficult forms of conduct to consider, for perception of government is highly modified by the prevailing values this ruling class perpetuates through society. For example, patriotism is often used to encourage support for war, making people feel like they have an obligation to agree with the government's decision. That being said, let's take an objective look at what government within a monetary system actually is and represents. The central role of government is basically the invention of regulatory legislation and policies to handle the functioning of society. Idealistically, the broad interests of the public would be the first priority of government. Unfortunately, as history has shown, this is not, and has rarely been, the case. Rather, government as we know it is actually a parent corporation to all the other corporations working within the country's economy. This, of course, makes sense, for the value of any nation is really determined by the state of its economy. This means that the government has a vested interest in the economic position of its nation, most specifically, with those interests that benefit them directly. Lobbying and contributions in America alone constitute billions of dollars a year, and this money is given entirely under the pretense of putting the donating party's agenda in action. Now, while the examples of government and corporate collusion are vast, the greatest monetarily derived crime of government is its use of war for the benefit of its corporate and financial constituents. In the words of two-time Congressional Medal of Honor recipient Major General Smedley D. Butler, war is a racket. It always has been. It is possibly the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious. It is the only one international in scope. It is the only one in which the profits are reckoned in dollars and the losses in lives. Accelerated industrial creation, military contracts, reconstruction contracts, energy and resource acquisition or theft, high-interest, austerity-driven World Bank and private bank loans for post-war economies are just a few of the highly profitable mediums utilized. The true motivation for war today is actually threefold: industrial commercial profit, maximized for the elite; resource acquisition or theft, as was the case with Iraq and Afghanistan; and strategic geopolitical alignment to increase the ease of further industrial profit and resource theft. War is probably the greatest sickness caused by the desire for wealth and power. Government, with its team of brainwashed assassins on hand, is involved in the ultimate form of self-preservation, and as long as the resources of the world remain hoarded and restricted for the material benefit of a few, this pattern of war will never end. Now, these classifications of corruption are only a generalized grouping. Vast nuances of human behavior and everyday life are also very much poisoned by this mechanism for profit. For if you look closely enough, you will see that nearly every act of strategic monetary gain is corrupt by its very construct. It is just accepted as normal by the conditioned culture. Leads us to the next section. In this section, we will discuss the nature and ramifications of the current worldwide economic collapse, and how it has been compounded by the gross selfishness and social irresponsibility of the government and corporate powers. Then, more profoundly, we will discuss the role technology is having in displacing workers and the powerful changes this phenomenon is going to force in the world economy at large. 1. Beyond irresponsibility. The collective external debt of all the governments in the world is now about $52 trillion, according to the CIA's World Factbook. Of the roughly 203 countries in the world today, only 4 do not owe others money. The United States alone has over $12 trillion of this debt as of January 2009, and a study authorized by the U.S. Treasury in 2001 found that in order to keep servicing the debt at its current rate of growth, by 2013, income taxes would need to be raised to 65% of one's income. The whole world is basically bankrupt. But how? How can the world as a whole owe money to itself? Obviously, it's all nonsense. The monetary system is nothing more than a game. Those in positions of social power alter the rules of the game at will. The nature of those rules are guided by the same competitive, distorted mentalities that are used to compete in everyday monetary life. Only this time the game is rigged at its root to favor those who actually run the show. For example, if you have $1 million and put it into a CD at 5% interest, you are going to generate $50,000 a year simply for that deposit. You are making money off of money itself. No invention, no contribution to society, no nothing. That being denoted, if you are a lower or middle class person who is limited in funds and must use credit cards and get interest-based loans to buy your home, then you are paying interest to the bank, which the bank is then turning around and using, in theory, to pay the person's return with the 5% CD. What the bank is basically doing is stealing from the working poor to pay the leisurely rich. Simply put, the social stratification we see in the world today is maintained and guaranteed by the monetary system's underlying mechanisms. That reality aside, let's return to the subject of the so-called business cycle. When money is added to the money supply, that money is then typically put to use for some reason. Very often these reasons include starting a business, buying a home, investing in the stock market, etc. This increase in the money supply often translates into so-called economic growth and hence the boom period of the business cycle. Unfortunately, money cannot be added to the economy indefinitely, for the debt and inflation caused by the expansion will eventually overcome the growth benefits. When problems begin to arise after periods of monetary expansion, such as rising debt levels, slowing people's desire to take on new loans, the central bank and government regulators have basically two choices. They can either 1. Attempt to continue the expansion by infusing even more money, often by lowering the interest rates, making credit cheaper, or 2. Let the contraction, hence recession, run its course, raise the interest rates, and bring the economy back to some kind of equilibrium. As far as history is concerned, the pattern has been for them to do both, basically with the idea being to ease the recession by increasing liquidity. The reasoning is simple. It is politically unpopular for the ruling class to have unemployed poor citizens. This can lead to contempt for leadership and instability. Therefore, there is always the game of placating the public with false security in order to avoid the truth coming out about the inherent dysfunctionality of the monetary system itself. The result of this easing of the contraction simply delays the inevitable, and since the U.S. government has eased virtually every contraction period since the Great Depression by infusing more money into the system, a doomsday scenario likely awaits. The big contraction, and it might be happening right now. As noted earlier, money cannot be added into the economy indefinitely, for the debt and inflation caused by the expansion will eventually overcome the growth benefits. This is what is now happening on a massive scale, and no intervention to ease this crisis is likely to work. Why? Mainly because the debt levels are way too high. The total debt of the U.S. government plus its citizens' private debt was about $53 trillion in 2007. This is simply an absurd amount of debt. The total U.S. money supply, M3, was only about $12 trillion in 2007, while the annual GDP of the U.S. was only about $14 trillion. Unfortunately, there is very little the U.S. government can do to stop this large contraction if they adhere to the tenets of the monetary system. Even with the insertion of tens of trillions of dollars, it cannot compensate for the imbalance. Plus, if they did this type of liquidity injection, the result would simply exaggerate the stagflation we are now seeing, where inflation and economic stagnation occur simultaneously. Is what will constitute the replacement of the institution we know of as traditional government. In the words of Dr. Ralph Linton, the tremendous and still accelerating development of science and technology has not been accompanied by an equal development in social, economic, and political patterns. It is safe to predict that such social inventions as modern-type capitalism, fascism, and communism will be regarded as primitive experiments directed toward the adjustment of modern society to modern methods. First of all, government as we know it is a byproduct of environmental scarcity. They are really monetary system creations. Sadly, due to the very nature of their power, history is one constant chain of governmental corruption, from the genocidal slaughter of peoples in opposing nations to the deliberate oppression of a country's own people in order to maintain the established order. Now, government decisions today are based on self-interest, just like the corporations. There will never be such a thing as an ethical government as long as money can be used to influence the decisions of political participants. When we understand that everything in regard to social organization is a technical process, we then see that there is little reason for traditional opinions in the solving of any problem. If a person reads one page of a book and closes it, he or she can easily have an opinion on that book as a whole. If another reads the whole book, They might also have an opinion. Whose opinion would you value more, the person who read the full book or the person who only read one page? In other words, the more information taken into account in the process of decision-making, the more accurate that decision will be. As discussed earlier, computers can now access trillions of bits of information a second across vast informational databases and compute output results near the speed of light. The transfer of decision-making to computers is the next phase of social evolution. It greatly reduces human error and removes dangerous biases, subjectivity, and erroneous opinion. Because of the limitations of the sensory and cortical equipment in our body and mind, no one can know everything there is to know in the world. Our senses are limited in range. Our eyes can only see a fraction of the electromagnetic field. Therefore, it is a logical progression that we delegate decision-making to machines, for they do not have these restrictions. Computers used as tools can and will be able to solve problems which humans simply cannot due to our physical and mental limitations. It is no different than a person who uses a pair of glasses to see or a calculator to do math. Glasses are a technological tool, an extension of the human being that helps a person see better than they would normally. Cybernetic machines are nothing different. They are nothing more than extensional tools that expand our abilities. The human species has the powerful ability to improve itself through technological invention, and we must realize this and maximize its potential. In a resource-based economy, people do not make decisions. They arrive at them through the use of advanced technological tools that incorporate the scientific method. There is no Republican or liberal way to design an airplane. So why do we use these outdated worldviews to operate society today? When we recognize society as a technological invention, with its component variables really no different than the component variables of an airplane, we then see that our orientation towards so-called government should be purely scientific. Politics is outdated, for its processes are largely subjective, highly influenced by money, and virtually without scientific reference. Government and the concept of the state will eventually be outgrown entirely and replaced by an objective system of global resource management and technological organization. Government thus becomes a cybernetic system, which is intimately combined with industry and is only responsible for the production and distribution of goods, along with resource and environmental management. Generally speaking, the components of this new system would be as follows. 1. A central computerized database containing catalogs of every known material and every known technical understanding. As noted previously, computers have the ability to catalog information and logically compute it on a scale much larger than any human can. As stated before, the most efficient decisions we can make are decisions that take into account all known relevant variables. Only computers will be able to handle the integration of all known earthly knowledge and come up with decisions that will be logically based on the full known range of data. Just as with our previous example of our car mechanic who had his tailored database program for solving mechanical problems, this central computerized database contains all known knowledge ranging from the properties, combinations, and applications of every element on the periodic table to the complete known history of technological invention. Once the associative system emerges, which will allow computers to contextually cross-relate all the known disciplines, we will have at our grasp a tool of immeasurable possibilities. For the new method of problem-solving and invention will be an interaction with this database program. In fact, it will likely come in the form of a simple website on the internet. You would pose a problem or question to the database, and it will give the best feedback that is possible based on the current state of knowledge at that period in time. It is no different than interfacing with a calculator, but this new calculator has a powerful associative system and an extensive database of knowledge that can not just understand and compute math. It can integrate physics, biology, astronomy, and every field of science into a concentrated tool. If this sounds like science fiction, you can rest assured that the U.S. military's Pentagon likely already has similar database and decision-making programs, which it uses for war strategies. However, in order for this system to be effective, it must also have real-time feedback input from the planet in order to understand what resources we have so we can account for dynamic equilibrium.